Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Glasgow Film Festival, which is now in full swing. I'm Anna Bogutskaya, and I am beyond honored to be hosting this conversation with a true titan of cinema and an icon for horror fans in particular, Mr. Roger Corman. Mr. Corman, it's such a pleasure to welcome you virtually, digitally, to the Glasgow Film Festival. How are you doing? How have you been dealing with this situation that we're in?
Well, I'm actually in a lucky position at the moment. I got my second vaccination shot a week ago, and I think I've just got one more week to stick it out here at home.
That's so good to hear. I mean, congratulations. Thank God. So I'm going to be asking you a few questions, mostly about the Masque of the Red Death, which has been beautifully restored and has just screened at the Glasgow Film Festival. And I wanted to ask you about your attraction to the tales of Edgar Allan Poe. Some of your best-known work has been adaptation of his stories. What is it about his work that always interested you?
Well, I believe that Poe was working with the unconscious mind, just as Freud a number of years later was. I think these things happen because the time is right. I can just quote two things. The problem in mathematics of calculus was known to the ancient Greeks. It was never solved for 2,000 years. Newton solved it, and in the same year, unknown to Newton, a German mathematician solved it just after it was necessary for calculus to be solved in order to usher in the Industrial Revolution. And I think the concept of the unconscious mind was something that I wouldn't say was quite that necessary, but nevertheless, it was percolating around. And I think Poe was doing it without true consciousness, as it were, of what he was doing, just as Freud was doing later. And I love the idea of working with the unconscious mind because I could then invent many things, certain sequences, particularly some dream sequences and so forth, which I could just sort of riff with because the conscious mind wasn't aware of what the meaning was behind it.
And I wanted to ask as well about the process of getting the film made. I know the story is very vast, but what was the most important thing for you in this particular adaptation?
In this particular adaptation, I had a problem that was similar to some of the other Poe stories. Most of his stories were very short, and Masque of the Red Death was a very, very short story, and it was difficult to adapt it to the screen until and I give credit here to Bob Campbell, came up with the idea of introducing Hoptoad from another short story into Masque of the Red Death as a subplot, and it actually enhanced Masque of the Red Death and made it possible to work with a full-length script.
Mm. And could you talk a little bit about the character of Prospero, Prince Prospero? Did you always have Vincent Price in mind for him?
Vincent was in my mind from the very first one, The Fall of the House of Usher. He embodied much of what Poe was thinking about, particularly both in Masque and in The House of Usher, which was the first one, in which he was a highly educated, elegant man, yet at the same time tormented by demons within Prospero's thinking. The key to him is, since Vincent and I used to talk about these things, of course, before you start the picture, I said, Vincent, the key to this is Prospero believes God is dead. With the absence of God, he is free to do anything he wants. If he wishes to replace God with Satan, or if he says there's nothing, it's just me, we can work that out. But the key, God is dead.
And do you think that Prospero's relationship with the idea of God is actually a way of covering up or of excusing his very human sadism? I mean, he's a very interesting, chilling character.
Yes, yes, definitely. That is the guiding light, as it were, of his character. Now, one of the things that's caused him to believe that God is dead is the Red Death. A just God would not have inflicted the Red Death upon humanity. I don't want to get too deeply into the religious aspects of this, but the fact that the Red Death is devastating the country is proof to him God is dead.
And would you be able to talk a little bit about how you directed Vincent in this role? Was there ever a moment where you were afraid of going too far with Prospero?
Um, yes, I took a moment to think about that. Vincent was very, very good. And just occasionally he understood the characters and he pushed it just a fraction too much. But basically, he had it under control. The way I worked, because these were really low budget films, is I didn't have a great deal of time to be directing on the set. What I would do would be discuss the character with each of the actors and then rehearse in advance. And I planned all of my shots in advance. So we were able to come in and just start shooting as soon as they had the lights up.
And I was wondering as well if we could talk a little bit about the look of the film, especially the colors, and how, which in the new restoration are just stunning, really, really taking over completely, I think, the screen that I watched it on. But could you talk a little bit about how you worked with Nicholas Roeg, with your cinematographer? Was there references? Was there a palette that you gave him? Did you have those vivid colors in mind when you started working on this?
I worked very well with Nick, and I give him great credit for the look of the film. But the look, my concept was, on most of the Poe films, we had dark, brooding style of the whole picture, but particularly of the set. But for Red Death, I wanted to emphasize, of course, red, and I thought I will go for a brighter color scheme, partially because when I started these pictures, I had very little money, and Danny Haller, my art director, and I would generally work out of rental studios in Hollywood. And the first thing you do when you're working that way, you go to what is called the scene dock, where flats from previous scenes have been stored. We would then take a lot of flats out of the scene dock, then repaint them, work on them, and create the set. And when we went into the scene dock of this British studio, it's as if we'd struck gold. Beckett had been shot there shortly before, and we looked at these flats and we thought, this is amazing. And Danny took those sets, and they happened to be of a slightly brighter color than what I was looking for. And so it's a combination of what I did, but heavily what Danny did to create those sets from a number of flats from Beckett, and what Nick did when I explained only just my color thoughts to him and what Nick did.
And could you talk a little bit about working with Nick a bit more? I mean, as far as I understand, he was still a fairly new cinematographer at that point. What made you want to work with him?
I was working with an English company called Anglo Amalgamated. And I talked to their head of production and I said, who are your, do you believe are the best up and coming cameramen in England? Because I knew I didn't have the money to afford a veteran, great award-winning cameraman. And he gave me samples of a number of cameramen. And as soon as I saw Nick's work, I said, he is the one.
Oh, and was there any other, aside from the vision that you had for it and with the constraints of a small budget, was there any other happy accidents like that where something that you did not imagine or you might imagine differently transformed because of something that just happened or that you found or stumbled upon?
Well, particularly in the dream sequences, I just found things that I could put into them there, and then Danny put them together in the shapes I wanted. So I would say that particularly.
Thank you. And I wanted to talk a little bit about the restoration itself and how it's tied into the complicated release history of Masque of the Red Death. So I understand that there were some problems with different territories with the release, with censorship and with things getting cut out. Do you remember some of the reasons why different organizations or different censors, what were the issue that they had with the film and that they wanted to cut out?
It wasn't cut out in the United States, but in Britain it was cut out. For instance, there was a scene where Jane Asher, playing the young girl, she's dirty and really covered with dirt and mud from the village, and Prospero takes her to the castle, and these women throw her into the tub. And what they did, we had this rig so it'd come off very fast. They pulled the clothes off and threw her into the pool, into the bath. And for, I would say, 1 second, you could see, and I deliberately shot it from the side, so you really didn't see anything. But for 1 second, you saw Jane nude falling into the pool. Nobody ever objected to that except the British censor cut that 1 or 2 second section out, and a couple of other little things like that.
Was there any? It's not a horror film with a lot of blood or a lot of gore in it, but there is something very emotionally terrifying about it. Do you think was there any pushback about? I hesitate to use the word morality, but the ideas that the film was exploring. Was there any reaction to the very sadistic character of Prospero or the ideas that he espoused?
Well, in America, they had, this no longer exists, but the Catholic Church had something called the League of Decency. And you generally showed the picture to the League of Decency because if you didn't get their approval, you lost a certain amount of your audience. And there was a rather lengthy argumentative discussion with the League of Decency from the standpoint of the church. But finally, they said, okay, we understand. It's a motion picture. It's okay. And so we got fun.
Do you remember what, in that lengthy discussion, what ultimately convinced them to approve the film, I guess the word is?
Well, it didn't help my relationships with the church to say that God is dead.
And when did the project of restoring the Masque of the Red Death start for you?
Well, it started with John Davison, who was my head of advertising. I came straight out of the NYU Film School, and I put him in charge of sort of publicity and one thing and another, and he worked his way up. And then, of course, went on to be a major producer in his own right. He did RoboCop and Starship Troopers and a lot of big films. And he remembered Masque. And he said, I was talking with him, and it was his idea. He said, we really should restore that. The prints are wrecked. And just for the record, there should be, because he admired also the picture, but particularly the photography, the colors and everything, they're lost. And he went to the Academy, and the Academy approved. So the Academy put up 1/3 of the money. John, just out of his generosity, put up 1/3 of the money, and I put up 1/3 of the money, and we had it restored by Photochem in Hollywood.
And when did that start? How long has it taken? Because I read that there was a lot of finding all the different cut scenes, and kind of it was a lengthy putting back together of what was your original vision.
It took a little while. It wasn't overly lengthy, but it had been cut sometimes different places, and it was difficult to get back actually to the original, but it just took a little bit of time.
And was there anything in particular as you were working on the restoration that really struck you, or that you really wanted to make sure got cleaned up or got a proper detailed attention so that for the restoration?
Well, I was looking heavily towards the long shots. The set was the best set I ever worked with, and I wanted to make sure that the sets were lit correctly, and also in the dream sequences, because I used today the dream sequences probably don't look that impressive, but with the limited amount of money and the elementary special effects that we had to work with at that time, because I used various filters on the camera, and then we did some optical printing over them, and I wanted to make certain that those came out well.
And I would love to hear you talk about the Dance of Death scene, which now in the context of a pandemic is even scarier now. And there is something really terrifying, I think, about the beauty of a dance choreography and the horror of a plague mixing together in that scene. Can you talk a little bit about how you choreographed that, and how you wanted to, the choices that you made in visualizing the plague and mixing with the dancing?
Well, I went to an English ballet company and said, I told them what I wanted to do. And I said, this dance is not a ballet, but you're a trained dance company, and this is what I would like to have you do. And they did the choreography. On that particular point of the picture, I cannot claim much from me. It was the dance company that choreographed it.
I mean, there's something really, really scary about it, especially in the scene with Prospero's downfall. And I was wondering, what do you think about this film still hits a nerve, even now, watching it now?
I would say not only even now, but more now, because coronavirus is very close to the Red Death. And we have, luckily, an ex-president who didn't understand it and didn't work with it. And the coronavirus hit us, I think, one of the worst in the world because of our inadequate response. So today, it has more meaning because there's actually the equivalent of the Red Death going on now.
I mean, absolutely. And could you talk a little bit about directing Vincent in that scene, and for a character who has been so self-assured and so confident in his relationship with death and his relationship with the devil, how the desperation that befalls him in that last part of the film and his downfall. How did you work with him in that final part of the film?
Again, it was simply discussing the character, in which I said at the start of the Masque, he is supremely confident. He believes that he's conquered the Red Death, and he's celebrating with his nobles and friends. And as the dance starts to build, he gets a sense that there is something wrong until he meets the Red Death at the end, which is the downfall of Prince Prospero.
And what I'm really excited about is a whole new audience discovering this film with this new restoration. And is there something that you would like to, for people who may have watched it or will watch it for the first time in 2021, what would you like them, or what would you hope they take away from the film?
I would hope they would just come away and say, hey, I like that film. But beyond that, I think the character of Prospero resonates today with a somewhat rightward movement politically of the autocrats coming in with great self-confidence and then falling, as did Trump, and as particularly from the Americas in Brazil, the same thing is happening to the Brazilian president, who at first denied the Red Death or denied coronavirus, and now is possibly facing his downfall as well for his denial of it.
And I'm wondering as well if you could take the same loving and really detailed restoration approach to any of the other films that you've directed, do you have any other ones that you would love to see restored in this manner?
Well, actually, Red Death was the second one we restored. We restored The Pit and the Pendulum first, because again, the colors were important in The Pit and the Pendulum. So the idea really came from John Davison, and we did the same thing there. He, the Academy, and I each put up 1/3, and The Pit and the Pendulum really looked very good. It was actually shown at the restoration was shown at the Cannes Film Festival, not in competition, but they have a special of films that are interesting. So the success of The Pit and the Pendulum, I said, okay, the one I want to do is Masque of the Red Death.
And is there a one that you would do after the Masque of the Red Death?
Well, I hadn't thought of that. Let me take a thought. Possibly The Premature Burial, or also the very first one, the Fall of the House of Usher.
Wonderful. Well, I'm hoping that gets to happen. Mr. Corman, thank you so much for your time and for your generosity with your answers. I've loved rewatching The Masque of the Red Death in this beautiful restoration, and I hope there are a lot more of your films that get to see this exquisite treatment given to them. Thank you everyone for tuning in. There is still a chance to watch the gorgeous restoration that I've been raving about of The Masque of the Red Death via the Glasgow Film Festival, and otherwise if you don't catch it at the festival, it is available on digital, DVD and Blu-ray. Thank you to Studio Canal for making this happen and for re-releasing the film, and thank you always to the Glasgow Film Festival. You can follow the rest of the festival activities on their social media and especially on their Twitter at Glasgow Film. And thank you again, Mr. Corman, for your time.
Thank you.